He's been called a monster, and he was a monster. And he's no longer a monster. He's dead. And that's a good thing for a lot of countries. We're prepared. We're totally prepared. And likewise, we're prepared to attack if we have to, as retribution.
Expect Iran to retaliate. That was the message today from the White House as it defended its decision to kill Iran's top general. The Trump administration says the drone strike that killed Qassem Soleimani saved lives, insisting Soleimani was planning an attack on Americans, though the details of that attack or alleged attack have not yet been revealed. The CBC's Katie Simpson joins us now from Washington with the latest. Hey, Katie, what's the president saying today about those tensions with Iran? We just heard from him not too long ago.
Donald Trump sat before reporters in the Oval Office. He was hosting the Greek Prime Minister, and he was asked questions, of course, about what is going on with Iran. And he sat before those reporters, and he openly bragged about what the U.S. government has done in the killing of Iran's top general, saying that it's good news for the U.S., it's good news for American allies, saying that many countries are quite happy with the actions that the U.S. has taken. But he also went on to say, while he was defending his decision, he also made an abrupt change in his position after repeatedly saying over the weekend that if tensions escalate and there is the need for further retaliation, that Donald Trump said he had selected a number of sites that were important to the culture of Iran that he would target for retaliation. After a number of experts came forward warning that that would constitute a war crime, Donald Trump today reversed his position.
I like to obey the law. But think of it, they kill our people, they blow up our people, and then we have to be very gentle with their cultural institutions. But I'm okay with it. It's okay with me. I will say this, if Iran does anything that they shouldn't be doing, they're going to be suffering the consequences, and very strongly.
Donald Trump and other members of his cabinet were pressed repeatedly today by reporters for evidence or proof demonstrating or to justify the American actions. You'll remember that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had said that the U.S. decided to act to launch that drone strike because there was an imminent threat to American lives. When a number of questions have come forward from reporters, from Democratic lawmakers asking for more proof in that, nothing has been made public at this point. However, lawmakers in Congress and the lawmakers today are getting briefings today and tomorrow with some classified information.
One member of President Trump's cabinet, Defense Secretary Esper, also spoke today, talking a bit about what you talked about there, asked about the evidence, but also asked about what Americans and the rest of the world really can expect going forward. What did he have to say on that?
Well, this is the big message that has sort of been pushed not only by Donald Trump, but by the defense secretary, who was trying to get in front of as many cameras as he could today. He did a sit-down interview with CNN, and he also held a news conference at the Pentagon. And he really pushed forward the suggestion that the Americans should be prepared for retaliation from Iran. And that's exactly the message he delivered today.
What happens next depends on them. I think we should expect that they will retaliate in some way, shape, or form, either through their proxies, as they've been doing now for how many years, or by their own hand. And so we take this one step at a time. We're prepared for any contingency, and then we will respond appropriately to whatever they do.
Esper went on to say that the U.S. doesn't want to start a war with Iran, but it is certainly ready to finish it if that is the case.
All right, thanks, Katie. Appreciate the update as always. The CBC's Katie Simpson for us in Washington. Meanwhile, Canadian forces are on the move in the Middle East. The Department of National Defense has announced some troops in Iraq are being temporarily relocated to Kuwait for their own safety, given what's happening in the region. Why not move all of them out? Should a full withdrawal from the region be considered? Joining me now from Toronto, Rob Oliphant is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. In Winnipeg, James Bazan is the Conservatives' defence critic. And over in Victoria, Laura Collins is a critic with the NDP. Hello to all three of you. Nice to see you. Really appreciate you making time for us.
Great. Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to all three of you. Mr. Oliphant, I'll start with you. Yesterday, Minister Harjit Sajjan told us that non-essential personnel were being moved out of Iraq. Today, Chief of Defence Staff General Vance said that some Canadian Forces personnel will be moved to Kuwait. Is it safe for any Canadian troops to remain in Iraq right now?
This is a very serious situation. I think our government is following it moment by moment. Right now, there have been operational decisions made to ensure the safety and care of Canadians. We are obviously keeping a close watch on travel advisories and making sure that our military personnel are not in harm's way as best as we can do that. So that means non-essential personnel are moved. Some others are participating in a pause on Operation Impact, which is our NATO training mission, which is being led by Canada. And we're evaluating the situation minute by minute, really, to ensure that Canadians are safe. That is our number one concern.
Just quickly to follow up, sorry, Mr. Elephant, do you anticipate that more Canadian troops will be moved out of Iraq imminently?
Those will be operational decisions. I'm not privy to the Department of National Defense, and the senior command officers there will make those decisions. They'll make them in the best interests of Canadian military personnel. They'll keep their families informed, and we'll make sure that we keep people out of harm's way.
We just heard the President, Mr. Oliphant, talk about the potential for Iran and Secretary Esper for Iran to retaliate. If Iran does retaliate against the U.S. and the U.S. invokes Article 5, will Canada support military action taken by the Americans?
Right now, our whole, everything we're doing is to try to de-escalate the situation. So the Prime Minister, Minister Champagne, Minister Sajjan are speaking to their counterparts with our allies. We're in constant contact with Iraqi officials. The minister has spoken with the Iraqi speaker of their parliament, as well as his counterpart. Numerous times he's engaged, as our Prime Minister is, with the King of Jordan, with the Chancellor of Germany. So we are taking these decisions very cautiously, very carefully, to make sure that we are working multilaterally and trying to use every diplomatic tool that we have to de-escalate the situation. No one wants a war. Nobody wants instability. We are committed to the long-term peace and stabilization in the whole of the Middle East, but particularly in Iraq at this time.
Mr. Bazan, do you think that de-escalation is possible?
We ultimately hope so, and I think all efforts have to be made to de-escalate and avoid war at all costs. But let's point out that Prime Minister Trudeau may be making some calls, but it's interesting that the one call that hasn't been made is a conversation between Trudeau and President Trump, because, of course, Trump doesn't trust Trudeau, considering what happened in London at the NATO summit when Trudeau was caught gossiping about the president at a cocktail party. Because Trudeau doesn't have that gravitas at the international level, it really doesn't matter what much he has to say to world leaders. What it comes down to is that we need to make sure that all the resources are being provided to the Canadian Armed Forces. I trust Chief of Defence Staff General Vance to make the decisions on how we do force protection. We want to make sure that we see this mission carried through. Just to correct Robert a bit, the NATO mission is separate from Operation Impact. The NATO mission led by Canadian General Carry-On is definitely the training mission and capacity building part of the exercise. But the anti-ISIS coalition, which is Operation Impact in Canada, is part of it. And it's US-led, and of course Canada is part of that under the leadership of General St. Louis. They are going to make the decisions on how we move forward to finish the task at hand, to bring peace and stability to the region, and to protect our forces at the same time. You've got to remember, these are the Canadian Armed Forces. These are soldiers who are trained to deal with these types of situations and conflict, and I have full confidence, as all Conservatives do, in them actually carrying out that task.
Do you think they should remain in the region, or are you concerned for their safety?
Look, I had the opportunity, Vashi, just before Christmas to actually visit our troops with Minister Sajjan and see firsthand on how they're doing. Because of the increasing risks that were in Baghdad, we didn't go there, but we did go to Kuwait and other locations. And I can tell you that they're prepared to deal with the situation as it evolves, and things were starting to evolve before Christmas. I believe that there was concern at that time before even the U.S. Embassy was attacked. So let's remember that Soleimani was a terrorist. terrorist. He has a lot of blood on his hands. He's responsible
Do you
for not
support
just
what the U.S. did? Does your party support what the U.S. did?
I can say that Canadians, as well as a lot of people who are victims of Soleimani, are celebrating, because this is a person that was responsible for carrying out terrorist activities throughout the region, including working with Hezbollah, Hamas, and targeting civilians in Syria, and never mind targeting all the innocent civilians in Iraq and Iran, including Kurds, Baha'is, Sunnis, and Christians and Jews in those regions. So,
but should the U.S. I don't want to take away from that, Mr. Bazan. You're absolutely right. He's a terrible guy. But should the U.S. have acted in the manner it did, given the considerations where repercussions are concerned?
I'm not here to respond to how the U.S. should or shouldn't act, especially when I don't know what type of intelligence that they had. But I can tell you that Soleimani was a terrorist, and he's the second in command of a terrorist regime working out of Tehran under Ayatollah Khomeini. Despite what some that are followers of Khomeini might say, the bulk of the Persian community here in Canada are celebrating the death of Soleimani.
Ms. Collins, let me ask you, your leader, Jagmeet Singh, tweeted at the Prime Minister today, urging him to act quickly to de-escalate the situation and warning him, quote, to not be drawn into the path that President Trump is taking. What does your party mean by that?
It is reassuring that our Prime Minister has finally started talks with foreign leaders to de-escalate the situation. This is something that we've been calling on for the Prime Minister to do for days. And what our focus needs to be right now is on peace, on peace building, on avoiding war, on de-escalating the situation. And I think Canadians do not want Canada to be led down the path that President Trump seems to be taking, that we are being brought closer to another disastrous war in the Middle East. And that is not what we want to see. We want to make sure that we want reassurance that the Canadian government is doing everything in their power to de-escalate this situation.
Mr. Bazan, Ms. Collins just laid out some of the things that General Soleimani was responsible for. Where does your party sit on the action that the U.S. took?
I think people are looking at the direction the U.S. is taking right now and seeing is contradicting, his previous threats of retaliating against cultural sites, and now he's backpedaling. We need to do everything in our power to de-escalate, to make sure that we are, the troops who are there want to stabilize the country, want to promote peace. Canadians absolutely do not want to be drawn in to a U.S.-led war in the Middle East.
I have time for a quick comment from each of you to finish off. Mr. Oliphant, I'll start with you. Mr. Bazan raised the specter of the Prime Minister speaking with President Trump. Why hasn't that happened yet, and will it soon?
Our Prime Minister is doing the work he needs to do. Our Prime Minister is speaking to world leaders, to the President of the European Council, to Secretary General of NATO, of key leaders like Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. He's spoken to the King of Jordan. Our Minister Champagne has been talking to his counterparts around the world. That's what we're doing. Canada's particular role on this is to use our gift in diplomacy, our engagement that we are there. We are in this region. This is our largest foreign expenditure that we have in promoting peace in the Middle East, and we're known for that. And with all due respect, James, our Prime Minister is a well-respected world leader who is engaged on the world stage, who has earned that respect and is using it right now to ensure that we can de-escalate the situation, keep Canadians safe, build long-term peace and stability in the region, make sure that destabilizing forces are dealt with, such as Daesh, and we're going to do that. And Canadians expect us to do it, and to do it well, to do it carefully, without rhetoric, without personal attacks on leaders, without doing that kind of things. We're doing the work that a government is supposed to do.
Mr. Bazan, does Mr. Oliphant have a point that, apart from what he just said, but just the idea that the Prime Minister has spoken with the representative from Jordan, has spoken to the Chancellor of Germany and people from the EU. I mean, those efforts to de-escalate are being made.
And I think that we want to see de-escalation take place. But to Rob's point, there's still the one major conversation that's not taking place, and that's between Trudeau and Trump. And I think that there's personal reasons for that. And Rob, you should have a talk to the Prime Minister about how he goes about not attacking people on a personal level, something that he needs to learn how to quit doing. So let's make sure that the adults in the room are making these decisions.
Let's be adults in the room right now.
Okay,
let's be adults in the room.
Maybe we send out Minister Freeland, as the Minister of everything to fix the reputation of Canada's reputation on the world stage. So let's look at the overall situation on the ground. And I have full confidence in what our military planners are doing right now under the leadership of General Vance. I think that as they move forward, we need to find those diplomatic solutions. But at the same time, let's quit trying to appease Iran in this process. We've been calling on the government for the last 18 months since Parliament actually passed a resolution to make the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran a terrorist organization, similar to what we did when we were government back in 2012 by making the Quds Force terrorist organization here in Canada. So let's make sure that we're taking some of these steps to send the strong messages to Iran at the same time as finding those diplomatic solutions to avoid conflict.
Ms. Collins, last word to you.
Yeah, I think the conversation that hasn't been had is the one with the Canadian people. Canadians want to know that this government isn't going to be led into another devastating war. These actions have real consequences. They have real impacts on people around the world, but also Canadians. Right here in BC, people were detained at the border. We're hearing reports of people detained for hours. These actions have impacts on our citizens and people around the world. And we need our Prime Minister to also reassure us, to let Canadians know that we're doing everything to de-escalate the situation, and we are not going to be led into a U.S.-led war in the Middle East.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time, but I thank all three of you for your time this evening very much. Thanks to Rob Oliphant, James Bazan, and Laurel Collins.
Thank you.
I've been in constant communication with my counterparts and have called on them to stand with us in the defense of coalition forces in Iraq. Working through NATO, the Defeat ISIS coalition, and with our partners on the ground, we continue to bolster Iraqi institutions to ensure the lasting defeat of ISIS. As we defend our people and interests, let me reiterate that the United States is not seeking a war with Iran, but we are prepared to finish one. We are seeking a diplomatic solution, but first, this will require Iran to de-escalate. It will require the regime to come to the table with the goal of preventing further bloodshed.
The U.S. and Iran could be on the brink of war and standing in the crossfire about 500 Canadian troops. They're in Iraq leading a NATO training mission and helping train local forces in the ongoing fight against ISIS. Today, the Department of Defense announced in this country that some troops will be moved to Kuwait temporarily. Is that the right move, or does it still leave Canadian troops in a dangerous situation? Roland Paris previously served as a foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He's now Professor of International Affairs at the University of Ottawa and joins me here in studio. Hi, Professor Paris.
Hi there.
Nice to see you again. Let's start off with first the news out of Canada, and that is that Minister Sajjan had told us last night that some non-essential personnel were being moved out. Now we find out that some troops are being moved out of Iraq. You called the move prudent, I believe, on Twitter. Why?
Well, right now those troops are conducting a mission that can't be conducted. The mission has been suspended. The training and assist mission has been suspended. And obviously there are concerns, trepidation about how Iran might retaliate for the killing of General Soleimani. So, it makes sense. It's prudent to be putting Canadian troops in a position where they're less likely to be struck.
The troops is one part of the equation. The other, and MPs were discussing it in the previous segment, is sort of how does Canada fit into all of this, and what role can this country potentially play? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Canada does play a very active role in the North Atlantic Council within NATO, and the North Atlantic Council met yesterday and decided to suspend but not end that NATO training mission. I'm sure Canada was there contributing to that discussion. And of course, there's a Canadian general who is commanding that mission. And all of those countries, Canada and most of its allies, if not all of its allies, have been calling for a de-escalation and a calming of that situation. Canada alone doesn't have a lot of sway in this context, but adding its voice to others who are talking about the necessity to de-escalate and also speaking to the Iraqi government about the value of continuing the anti-ISIS operation. Those things are actually useful.
When you look at the conversations that we've seen that the Prime Minister has, and as the opposition was saying, not with President Trump, but with Chancellor Merkel, among others, the King of Jordan, a whole bunch of people from the EU, the various governments in the EU. What do you imagine those conversations are about? Are they focused on the potential for de-escalation?
I think so. I think part of it is really sharing observations about what's going on. I think there's a great deal of uncertainty and confusion about what's taking place on the ground. You have the Iraqi government or the parliament having taken this non-binding vote for foreign forces to leave the country. You have the United States issuing that letter that it rescinded 5 hours later yesterday, saying that it was planning on removing troops. You have these dire threats going back and forth between Iran and the United States. I think that the situation is extremely fluid right now. Part of what they're talking about is probably just sharing their views on that, and part is about the need to join up their diplomacy to be calling for the kind of restraint that is going to be necessary to prevent this very volatile situation from potentially exploding into something worse.
Can I ask you a bit about Canada's foreign policy where Iran is concerned? Obviously, you advise the Prime Minister on foreign policy. You're an expert in foreign policy. We have seen a bit of a change in the government, in government, and then in foreign policy towards the country. In 2012, the relationship was cut off. When Justin Trudeau was first elected, I think it was Stéphane Dion expressed a desire to see some sort of restitution of the relationship. How would you describe the foreign policy towards Iran right now, and what do you think it should be?
Well, we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran right now, so it's pretty limited, our relationship with Iran. And I think that the foreign policy in general has been one of opposing Iranian support for militias in the region, and also expressing concern and opposing the development of ballistic missiles in Iran. Canada did support the Iranian nuclear accord that the Trump administration withdrew from, which arguably set a whole series of events in motion. But I think overall Canada's position on Iran has been quite limited because our relations are quite limited and our influence in the Middle East is quite limited.
Is that a function just of the situation, or is that particular decisions taken by this government?
Well, I think that with regard to Iran, the suspension of diplomatic relations took place under the previous government, and that certainly made it much more difficult for us to have not only communications with Iran, but eyes and ears on the ground in Iran to know what's going on there, because if you don't have diplomats, then you don't have those reports coming back and the capacity to gather intelligence. But I think that there have been blockages in the attempt to restore a kind of discussion with Iran, and the result has been that we really are nowhere in our Iran policy.
Was it wrong to aspire to change the relationship or to improve the relationship, given the pattern of behavior we've seen from Iran?
No, I think that in general that you talk to other countries and you talk to your adversaries too. You know, at the very height of the Cold War, we maintained an embassy in Moscow. So the idea of just suspending relations with governments that you don't like basically eliminates the possibility, as I said, not only to have conversations, but to be gathering information and intelligence on the ground where those countries are.
On a broader scale or in a broader context, when you're talking about the situation right now between the U.S. and Iran, we've heard Secretary Esper and Secretary Pompeo both say expect them to retaliate. What are you expecting as far as that goes?
It's very difficult to say, of course. I think that the Iranians have been very calculating in the past. I don't expect them to be impulsive. I think that they'll choose their moment and their time. They're under tremendous pressure internally to retaliate. They've indicated that they will retaliate. The Supreme Leader attended a meeting of their National Security Council and effectively said that there would be retaliation. But I think that they're going to pick their moment very carefully, and they have this incredibly difficult needle to thread, which is to retaliate in a way that demonstrates to their own population, and they hope to the United States, that the killing of General Soleimani was unacceptable, without triggering a further retaliation from Trump. That is going to be extremely difficult, and we know how unpredictable Donald Trump is. So I think it's
I guess that's what I want to
forward.
ask, because I feel like people who are sitting at home watching this all unfold are wondering, How much does this escalate? How far does it go? Should we be worried about another potential war? What are your thoughts?
I don't think either the United States or Iran, including Donald Trump, including the supreme leader in Iran, I don't think that they want a war. The risk is that they end up with one through a series of escalations. And we are looking at a kind of the ingredients for a classic, almost textbook escalatory spiral. That's why all these other countries, including Canada, have been saying, calm, de-escalate, don't take sudden actions now, because the more time that goes by, the lower the temperatures are, and the less likely it is for us to see that kind of out-of-control escalation.
All right, hope so. Thank you so much, Professor Paris. Appreciate your insights as always. Roland Paris, Professor of International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.